I did this talk at Connect.js, October. And so it's kind of a long talk, it's a lot of stuff, and we're in a much more condensed period of time here, so I'm going to kind of rip through it, and I'll definitely be going to the bar afterwards if you all want to talk, so we'll kind of run with that. But software craftsmanship, it's just kind of, if you've been around anybody that's like into it, then they're kind of into it. Well, let me say this. Being a long talk, I've cut a lot of slides on this, so I've got some kind of rusty transitions here. But a lot of craftsmanship in software is about how you think, and changing how you think as the times change. So just kind of laying a little groundwork for this. A long time ago, they used to say the world was flat, and flat Earth had limitations. So if you think in that context, you can only go so far in one direction, only so many directions you can go, and if you get outside the borders, then there was problems. Yep, we're going to have this. Sorry about that. All right. So, sorry. At one point, though, you know the story, how it goes. They thought the world was flat, and eventually they found out that it wasn't, and everything that they feared wasn't really true. And as coders, though, we live in a world that looks like this. Now, if you've been around software development for a long time, some of you are already thinking you know what this means. It's actually this. Scope, schedule, resources, and quality. The iron triangle. Is anyone familiar with this? Some people are nodding their heads. Okay, so what we have is, when the iron triangle is a way of managing a project, and where scope, this is what we build, this is how long we have to build it, and this is how much money we have to spend, how many people we can put on the project. So these are limitations. There's problems with this, though, is that there's only so many directions you can go, there's only so much you can do, and if you break the boundaries, there are serious consequences. For decades, the development community didn't ask questions, or they didn't buck the system, basically. And this is what we used to do here. How many are familiar with Waterfall? How many are still doing Waterfall? Anyone? A couple people raising their hands real slow, like I don't want to admit it. But so I've been coding software for probably 20 years, and I've done a lot of software development, and I've done Agile development, all that kind of stuff. But in Waterfall, this is what they did. In the beginning, they had documents. They had somebody talk to users, say, "What do you need to get done?" We write use cases, and we create a bunch of documents, and then we hand these off to the architects. And the architects are just smart guys. They don't even code anymore. They just write papers. Okay? And sooner or later, when they get all this documentation done, that takes months and months and months of that little corner of the triangle we're dealing with, it drops down to here, and you as a developer get a stack of paper on your desk, and they say, go build it. And so then you go from there. At the end of a very long and tedious process, eventually you have software, you eventually deploy it, you test it, you get some feedback, and it goes into the maintenance stage. Often they call this SDLC. Anybody know what that means? Software Development Lifecycle. So the iron triangle has limitations. The scope, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So I get for not looking at my screen. Okay. In this model, the business told us what they wanted, accounting told us how much they'd pay for it, and these execs decided that we had to deliver within a certain period of time. It's also called BDUF, or Big Design Up Front. Anybody heard this term before? Some people shaking their heads. Again, design, document, code, test, feedback, and deliver. And the idea was that we would design the whole project from the beginning, document the snot out of it, and then hand it down to someone lower and let them code it, and go through the process. This thing, obviously, if you've been around software for a while, you know this has lots of problems because really nobody at this stage, nobody really has a crystal ball. You really can't tell what's coming. So there's a lot of problems with Waterfall, and you'll understand why I'm getting to this in a minute. But in Waterfall, you basically have a one-shot project scope. They have to come up with everything they want to do at the beginning because there isn't a lot of change in the middle. You can't really adapt. The architects tend to over-engineer. So you get a lot of stuff that gets built that actually doesn't need to be built to the level they want to build it, and features that get built that aren't really needed. So the developers in this kind of situation are actually coding for the architects. They're not really coding for the customer. You don't have customer contact. Going back to the waterfall, every time it goes down, the idea was, comes down one step of the waterfall, comes down another step, and each step can only really talk to those step one up. So as a developer, you're like way down the waterfall. You never really get to understand the customer. So also in this kind of environment, it produces a lot of micromanagement. So in large corporations, and again, a lot of you are doing Agile now from the lack of raised hands, but in a traditional waterfall environment, the concept is they organize their management structure for large teams of entry-level, low-level to medium-level coders. And then once you get to be a senior coder, you probably at some point hopefully get promoted to be an architect, or you get tired of it and you go into management. In the Agile methodology, it's a whole lot different. Anyway, you can see that any of these been on these kind of projects, you see this kind of thing, all this stuff comes up. Bottom line is corners get cut, projects come in late, features aren't there, and the whole thing is based on assumptions at the beginning of the project that often break. The iron triangle is not really about creating quality software. When you think about it, the triangle of the scope and the time and the resources, it's really all about mitigating the risk, making sure that the customer gets his features, accounting doesn't have to pay too much, and the execs get their projects done in time so they get their bonus. So when the projects comes in, a lot of times it is over budget, it's over deadline, and it lacks functionality. So when you go over budget, they always say you're too expensive. That's actually one I don't mind too much. So I don't mind being told I'm expensive. Being told that I'm slow, you know, I can deal with that. I like taking my time. I like writing good software. When they say it lacks functionality, you didn't finish. But if it lacks quality, they say you're incompetent. And for me, that's one that doesn't sit really well with me. Ultimately, in this kind of paradigm, the quality suffers. The problem with this is software development in the waterfall methodologies is it's approached as a defined process. So if I'm going to do a waterfall process and roll out a bunch of servers somewhere and do a bunch of infrastructure stuff, that's a very defined process. But with software development, it's an empirical process. You don't know the end from the beginning. There's a lot of things that you have to find out on the way. You build an interface and you have to find out how the customer's going to use it. A business analyst sits at the front of a project that's building screens. He's not even a software developer. He's just doing mock-ups from stuff. So you learn a lot in development by actually working with the customers and seeing how they use these things, and the best software projects are actually built in this iterative fashion that way. Either way, no matter what you do, you have to respect the iron triangle. Along the line there, this started happening, if you trace the development of the software industry, and when the object-oriented technology started coming out, Smalltalk and C++ and eventually Java and a lot of those, things started changing, and there got to be like a lot of big conferences, and there was more collaboration going on. And a lot of the big think tanks of that day, the thought leaders started to have ideas, and they started looking at this differently. And they came out with this. Now notice the names on here. Have you all ever read the Agile Manifesto? You familiar with it? So these names on here are really important, and I'll show you one in a second. but individuals over interactions and processes over tools. So companies like to buy processes and they like to buy tools. And so a lot of companies are adopting Agile because they think it's a process. But they're not really getting the culture of it. Again, check the names: Kent Beck, Alistair Cockburn, Ward Cunningham, Martin Fowler, Andrew Hunt, Bob Martin, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sutherland, Dave Thomas. This is a book that I'm currently reading now called Software Craftsmanship, Professional Pragmatism, Pride by Sandro Mancuso. And he said that the waterfall approach combined with traditional management style can't cope with the fast pace of the market anymore. Lean startup model, get it out there quickly, get feedback, iterate, completely change the game. Agile is having an effect on corporations, and as developers, this affects us and how we develop software. Corporations are getting flatter. There's less structures of management, less people telling us what to do. We have to be, slipping the word. You have to have the initiative to do things yourself. Less opportunity to be the quiet coder requires a lot more collaboration. So I've worked, y'all work in like the tall cubes, short cubes, open seating, tall ones. Some people nodding their head. Short ones, see over the top? Yeah. No cubes, that's really great.
Thank God.
Yeah. You know, the first job I went to where I walked in, they had open seating. I walked in and I looked at this big room and it was a bunch of tables and people sitting around tables and I was like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? And what I soon found out was I got myself into a good thing, because the collaboration, if you're not in that kind of environment, you're thinking you want your cube and you want to shut everybody out, you want to be left alone, you just want to get in the code. But what you find out is when you're able to have that open seating environment and there's buzz going on all day long, people are asking questions, you're overhearing stuff. Even if you're totally focused on your code, you're absorbing all this other stuff that goes on. And it's really great. And you have no cubes, you know what I'm talking about. Just to be able, your face is in your code and you're in your computer, you can just ask somebody something over the wall, you know, short ones. Like the ones we had were little 12-inchers, they were whiteboard stuff you could write on. But you were looking eye to eye to everybody. And so this really highly collaborative environment made a huge, huge difference in the cross-training and learning and just learning about the app and where's this. You could save an awful lot of time working that way. On the bottom point down here, more need for leadership and negotiation skills. I remember a situation I had where the product owners had put a story in our sprint and it couldn't be done. I would go back and forth with these guys and we would talk about acceptance criteria, and I finally said, well look, we've got something in here that if you want me to get all this stuff done in this sprint, it's a lot higher risk than you think it is, and there's a good chance that we can lose it. So what we used to do is sit down and actually negotiate this stuff, and I'd go sit in the room with the product owners and we would negotiate what we were going to get done in the sprint, and often there's trade-offs that you can go through. And the product owners actually, over time, learned that this became a really effective process to where they would actually call me and they would say, hey, we've got a new epic, we want to get some things going, can we get together and talk about it? We would go in a room, we would start on one side, just whiteboard all the way around the room. And by the end, we'd be snapping pictures of our drawings on the wall, and they'd be uploading pictures from their phone into the stories and working from there. As you as a coder, there's more expectations on you when you work in an Agile environment. Number one, you have to work a little harder to understand the customer. When you're working off a document, you just have to understand the document, what the document says. But when you're in a situation where you are actually working for the customer and your heart's in it and you're designing something for the customer, it makes a huge difference. Also, being a team player, the cube environments really don't have that team effect on people. I remember going one place where I was interviewing for a position, and they told me it was all Agile, and we talked about the whole thing. We're doing Scrum, we're doing this, that, and the other. And I go in and they go, oh yeah, we got a ping pong table, we got a foosball table, and I go in the front door, and there's a ping pong table there, there's a foosball table there, and nobody's playing them. And then they walk me around, and it's like everybody's in these little offices. All the coders were in offices where their doors shut. And he shows me all the way around, and we go in the conference room, and we sit down and we talk, and he asks me some questions, and I answer him, and we get all the way through, and he says, "We have any questions for me?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you collaborate?" And he just looked at me like, "What?" He didn't get it. So when you understand collaboration and team play, or when you understand working together as a team, it changes you as a coder. It makes you a different kind of coder. Also in Agile, what's our time? I don't have my phone out. I'm good? Okay. I'm going to buzz through this pretty quick. In Agile, one of the big differences is instead of having teams of a bunch of specialized skills, what they like to do is they like to have a team where you're cross-training. So as I mentioned before, in your SDLC environments where their management structure is about large teams and they get people right out of school, right out of school, come in entry level, train them up, you're a junior coder, you're a coder 1, coder 2, whatever title that they have on it. And so they want large teams, and they want to manage the risk by having a large team of kind of average coders. In Agile environments, what you find is a lot of small teams, 5 to 7 people, a lot of times. And what's going on is that there's a lot of cross-training. So I remember I went to this one job I was on, and they brought me in, I was a UI lead, and everyone else on my team was Java coders, and I was not a Java coder. I had other back-end skills, but I didn't have any Java. And it was interesting because just being around these guys and learning stuff, and we would get together, we would take a book and brown bag our lunch together or whatever. They would pull me over and I would help them on some JavaScript, and they would holler at me and say, "Hey, here's an easy Java thing. See if you can go figure this out. Call me in 15 minutes, whatever if you don't get it." And so you had this constant give and take of mentoring people up. And so in the Agile environments, you actually become a much better coder because you're going to get exposed to other technologies, learn things from other people. You become more of a polyglot instead of just a one-centric technology guy. So, let's get through some of this. Talking about Agile, a lot of people say, "Do you do Agile?" And Agile isn't really something you do, it's something you are, it's a culture. If you're in a non-Agile environment and they're talking about it, like the place I'm at right now, the Agile stuff that's going on, they have all their big documents and their programs for quality control and SDLC, and then they have this thing over here they call ADLC. So they take the SDLC and they change the S to an A, and they call it ADLC. So the Agile stuff is just like popping in little places. It's kind of a grassroots thing. So those of us that are doing it, it's actually a lot of fun because we get together and we talk and stuff like that. But methodologies are something that you do. Agile is something that you are. When Agile doesn't work, it's usually because of the culture. You're taking a new process, you're taking new frameworks, and you're putting them in a culture that just doesn't allow that. So some of you are saying, "I thought this was a talk about software craftsmanship and JavaScript." And some of you are understanding why I'm talking about this. Agile boils down to two things. Customers want good software and developers want to create good software. And we need an environment where this can actually happen. I'm deciding which slides I'm going to skip here. Pete McBreen wrote a book called Software Craftsmanship, and he says software development is meant to be fun. If it isn't, the process is wrong. Going back to the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, take another look at the names here. Here is the Manifesto for Software Craftsmanship, and this came out a couple years after the Agile Manifesto. The point I want to make is that Agile was actually created for software craftsmanship. Go back, see these names. These guys were the thought leaders of the day. They were the guys that spoke in the conferences back then, back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. And those of you that have been around for a while, you know who a lot of these people are. But they were writing books like this one. So when I started coding, when I first started coding, I found that I'd be reading a book about a certain technology, and it would get to a certain point. I used to go down to what was then Barnes & Noble, so I'd go down there on Sunday afternoons, and I'd get a tall Starbucks, and I'd sit on the table, and I'd go get 2, 3, 4, 5 books on a certain topic, and I just sit down and I start reading through the books, and then if I found one I liked, I would buy it. This is before ebooks. And what got me started on the whole code quality thing and software craftsmanship thing was I started finding a lot of books kept mentioning they would refer to the same book a lot. They would talk about the quality in code, not just how you do it in terms of what the syntax is, but understanding the nuances of what makes good coding and what makes bad coding. This is actually one of the first books that was ever written about software craftsmanship. And in here, Andrew Hunt and David Thomas, their names are on the Agile Manifesto. They started this one and the next one I mentioned, to start comparing writing software. The whole paradigm of software engineering, they said, doesn't really fit, because the idea of software development being a science, yes, that applies, but it's also a craft. It's also an art, and there's a lot of stuff you can teach people. Then there's a lot of stuff you just can't teach people. There's so much to I'll get into that in a minute. This is the next book here, Pete McBreen. Now, actually, he had in his book on software craftsmanship. Sorry, at this point, I'm going too fast trying to get through this. The whole idea of Journeymen Master, what they were drawing on was in the older history in Europe with different trades, they would have guilds, and the guilds would have craftsmen and masters and masters, journeymen and apprentices, and they would actually bring somebody up. And so it was really hard to get a job as an apprentice. You basically had to sweep the floor and do crud work. But once you became a journeyman, then you were actually skilled and you could do things. And the journeyman would actually travel around and work for different masters. And the idea of being this constant learning, constant trying to improve your skill, constantly trying to become a craftsman. And they were bringing these principles into software development and talking about how, and Pete McBreen made this point too, about how schools, universities weren't really teaching people how to code. I know I was on a project at a contract at a big company here in Atlanta that drives brown trucks and ships packages. And we had a kid in there that was a tech student, and he would come in and work summers, and then he'd go back to school, and next summer he'd come back and work. And one day he and I were talking, and he was in CIS, or whatever they call the degree there. And so this guy could code. But I was talking to him about the school and what they do and what's in his program, and as we're talking one day, I'm like, what languages do they teach you? And he goes, well, they don't. So they don't teach us any languages. They just teach us how to manage projects, and they teach us about how things fit together. And I said, are you serious? And so this goes back to, and this is just a few years ago. What Pete was saying in his book, he was talking about how kids are getting out of school and they don't really understand software. They don't know how to build software. They don't know how to programming languages. And we have to look at this and say, we've got to invest ourselves in the upcoming generation of coders and mentor people. So he also said apprenticeship makes a difference because it instills a lifelong passion to master the craft. It instills a passion for perpetual learning, and in the process, enables the apprentice to become a great developer. So on the note of craftsmanship, I think that craftsmanship is really about how you think. And if you're a craftsmanship in software, you're probably a craftsman in other things that you do. So I've been working for the last probably year or so on remodeling my house. And I've got new floors, and I've painted the cabinets, and did all kinds of stuff. And my son-in-law was over one day helping me. We were working on some things together, and we were doing some trim carpentry around the house, and I was showing him how to do it. And he stopped in the middle, he was just watching me, and he said, this is a game for you, isn't it? And I said, yeah. It's a game for you. I said, yeah, it is. I said, every piece of trim I put in, I'm going to try to make the joint better than the last one I did. And so in what Pete's saying here, instills a passion for perpetual learning, and in the process enables the apprentice to be a greater developer. When it comes to software craftsmanship, the way I think about it, you think about it how you want, But if you're a craftsman kind of person, if you enjoy whatever you do, you're trying to do the best you can. You know, if it's your favorite recipe you cook, or something you do around the house, or the way you mow your lawn, or the way you know, wax your car, whatever it is that you do when you're not coding. If you have that mentality of constantly trying to perfect your craft, then you're gonna apply that. Software craftsmanship is mentality of craftsmanship applied to coding. And this is what he's trying to get across here. One of the other great books that's out there, I haven't read all of these, I will confess that, but I read a lot of most of them. Clean Code by Bob Martin. He's affectionately known as Uncle Bob. This is one of the great books. Another one of his, The Clean Coder. Martin Fowler talked about refactoring, and a lot of things you hear today. Here's one. You ever heard of code smells? Heard that? Okay, that's a Martin Fowler idiom. And I loved his book. I haven't read it all, but again, I read a lot of it. And duplicated code, duplicated work, long methods, long functions, long classes, large parameter lists, in other words, functions with too many arguments in them. Shotgun surgery, you fix one thing and you gotta change it in 20 different places in the app, that kind of stuff. Feature envy, you're in a function and it's constantly trying to find out too many things about other parts of the program to do its job in that particular function. Anyway, this is probably one of the first books on software craftsmanship that I ever read. And it's kind of the one that got me started. It's actually, any guys are Microsoft guys? Yeah, there's one, two, couple. So this is a Microsoft Press book, and Steve McConnell, he's well known in that world. But one of the things he said that I love was, you know, he said code is read many more times than it's written. And there's a whole point there of when you write your code, don't just write your code so it's going to be like run really fast on whatever platform it's going to run on. Write your code in a way that the guy that has to enhance it or debug it 6 months or 2 years from now can actually figure it out. One of the things I hate about code, one of my rants, is cute stuff. So cute stuff, and it's just complicated. It's not feedback there. The kind of code where you get into it, and the guy takes a bunch of code, he wraps it all in one line, and you spend 30 minutes trying to figure out what that one line of code means. And you can't debug it without just taking it all apart and then debugging it and then maybe putting it back together. But I think code should be easy to read, personally. And so I liked, in Steve McConnell's book, he talks a lot about that kind of stuff, coding for other people. This book here is one I recently picked up, and you know, in our industry, I will say I've met a lot of very cocky people. And sometimes I'm one of them. So we love what we do, and you have to be smart to do this, and that goes to our heads, and we think that we're sometimes smarter than we are. But when we get that way, you know, you get to where you're thinking you're really smart, and you're always talking about what you know how to do, what you know how to code. You kind of get yourself in this mindset of, I don't have anything to learn. And what another thing that comes off of it is you can put this air on around you, and then people were like afraid to ask you questions because you're too cool for them and all that. But this book I found approaches, and I'm not going to go into who these guys are, but these are pretty accomplished guys. You go Google them and look them up and see who they are. But Ward Cunningham, he was on the Agile Manifesto. He's been around a long time. This book is about how to put yourself in the position of being an apprentice. If you're kind of lower on the food chain, meaning you're starting out, but you could be like a total ninja, and you could benefit from reading this book because it talks a lot about how you think and how to position yourselves and how to build mentoring relationships, you know, around you. There's an awful lot of really, really good stuff in this book, and I like one of the things he has in here when he talks about he tries to constantly remind himself how stupid he is. And I think, me, so I've been coding for 20 years plus. And I come to things like these meetups, and I get around guys that are like 5 and 10 years, 15 years younger than me. And you guys are starting out learning stuff, sometimes that I didn't get to do it until I've been coding for 10 years. And you think, oh man, these kids they're like 25 years old and they know how to do that. And I didn't learn to do that until I was like some other age, I won't mention. Yeah. But the point he talks about, this mentality that we get, you're a younger coder and how you feel about older coders, and how older coders feel about younger coders, and how to position yourselves in relationships with other people, how to seek out mentors and how to talk to mentors. I know I was in a meeting recently, and one of the guys on the team I was on was trying to get a subject matter expert on a certain topic to help him with things. And they agreed that they would take time out of each sprint and they would do some KT, some knowledge transfer. And we said, okay, well, we'll do that. We'll do it every day right after Scrum. So the first day comes and he's all happy. He's got his notebook and he's got a fresh cup of coffee. And he says, okay, let's do KT. And the senior guy looks at him and goes, okay. And the young guy goes, okay, well, KT me. Tell me everything you know. And the guy says, no. And if you've ever been in a mentoring situation, you know exactly what that means. So as a younger person, when you want someone to mentor you, you don't want to say, tell me everything you know, because y'all know this, the best time to really learn something is when you've got a specific problem that you want to solve, when you have a specific thing that you're interested in and you're hungry to learn it. So, this particular guy says, no, probably not today. So we left our meeting, and the younger guy, he was like, oh man, I don't know. I'm like, dude, let me give you a hint here. I said, go do your work, find a problem, and then do everything you can to find out about that problem. So when you go in, you talk to them, you have some specific questions, and then you say, look, here's a problem I found, here's what I did to find out the answer, and here's where I'm stuck, and this is where I need help. So I used to, years ago, I was into weightlifting and bodybuilding and stuff. And I had a partner that was really good, and we trained together for a couple years, and he knew where my weak spots were on my list, and I knew where his were. And so let's just take bench press. So this guy could bench press 400 pounds. Well, sometimes he could bench, a little more, sometimes he could bench a little less. But have you ever worked out, have you ever done a bench press before? Ever had a spotter? So what you don't do when you're spotting somebody on a bench press, you don't grab the bar, you don't pull it up for him. What you do is you stand there and he's pushing, and there's a sticking point about right there, kind of right in the middle. There's a sticking point. And usually all you have to do is put your fingers on the bar and just give it a couple ounces of pressure, and you get them through the sticking point. So as a mentee speaking to a mentor, and you want help on something, push yourself to your sticking point, and then find somebody on the team and say, hey, I'm stuck. I need help. One of my best friends is a guy who's actually much younger than me, and we coded together on a couple different jobs, and I just love this guy. But we've coded with each other so much. We've done pair programming, and we've done code reviews, we do stuff, so we know where we make each other mistakes, and we laugh at each other something. We do the same dumb things over and over again. But it's so cool because I'm much older than him, but we've worked together so much that we're really totally comfortable with it. He can come to me and say, hey dude, I'm stuck. I can go to him and say, hey dude, something is wrong here. I need 2 more eyeballs because I don't see the problem. And he'll look at my code and he goes, dude, same problem as last time. I'm like, what? He goes, you missed that right there. And I'm like, oh man, why didn't I see that? Well, everybody has patterns they catch easy, and when we all have patterns, we don't catch easy. But the point is I think that you build these relationships and you become highly collaborative with people, and you work with them, and they, just like you're pushing weights or doing anything else, they know your coding style, they know your weaknesses, they know your strengths. And when you help other people are going to help you. So this, again, being a great book. Software Craftsmanship, Professional Pragmatism and Pride. This is the book I'm actually reading right now. Awesome book. So let's talk about JavaScript a little bit. So all these books so far are books that are written about the classic software disciplines, C++, Java, that kind of stuff, come out of the whole object-oriented world. Going into JavaScript, the environment is entirely different. It's much different than server-side where a lot of these other languages took place. It's kind of crazy. You can read the screen there, so I'm not going to hit on the points too much. But I remember having a conversation with Director of Architecture on a certain job where I was wanting to do some things with the whole UI side of the app, and he just didn't get it. He just really didn't get it. And he said, well, it should work like this, should work that. And I go, well, that's fine for you. That's fine for you. But this is what I'm dealing with. Stuff goes out there, and we don't know what browser it's going to land on, what machine it's going to land on. And he said, well, that should always work the same. I said, well, it just doesn't work the same. I said, how would you like it if every time a user hits this app, we're going to write a little program that's going to run in the background? And every time a different user logs on and gets a session on the app, we're going to change the version of Java that's running on the machine. And then the next time a user hits it, we're going to change how much RAM that machine has. And at other times, we're going to throttle the bandwidth. And we're just going to wreak havoc with this back into this app. And he goes, we're not going to do that. I go, well, that's, in the world of JavaScript and UI, that's where we live. Somebody's always changing the RAM. Somebody's always changing the version. We don't know what it's going to run on. You know what I'm saying? There's some bell curve, reasonable doubt stuff. But the point is, it's a hostile environment, and there's a lot that you just, you can't control everything. JavaScript, check my time again. All right, let me wrap up real quick here, but I'm gonna screen through these. JavaScript changed a lot in 2001. Before this time, it was about 2001. Before this time, it was kind of script kiddie stuff. All we did was, we had jQuery running in the browser. We did iCandy. But around this time frame, when JSON came out, Douglas Crockford, ooh, I misspelled that. Didn't see that. I see it now. Crockford, they call him Croc, is his affectionate name in the industry. But during this time frame, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were several things that changed. JSON came out, we got away from XML and SOAP and all that kind of stuff. We started moving in the direction of JSON, and we started having AJAX and a couple of the big things, Gmail, Google Maps, and Outlook Web, that started having single page application kind of stuff and AJAX stuff going on. That was a total entire game changer for world of JavaScript because it created what we have now as SPA, single page applications. So now UI is not just the paint. In large software shops, a lot of times they think the back end guys are the real coders, and they think we're just the painters they call in when they get done. But that whole thing has changed because now they're just the REST API guys. And a lot of the application is actually what's going on in the UI. Applications are getting much more complicated on the front end than they are on the back end. In that, we're coming, again, rusty transition because I'm cutting out slides. But because we've gone from doing, jQuery-ish menus and stuff like that to full-blown applications, the quality of our code is becoming the whole code base is becoming much more complicated. And out of this, there's a lot of things that we have to fix. JavaScript has been the Wild West, and we just can't afford to be that way anymore. I recently, through coming to meetups and hanging around afterwards, I typically have these conversations with people, and I actually walked around at Connect.js and had a conversation with a bunch of people, and I was asking, okay, when you think of code that sucks, what do you think it is that makes it suck? And this is just kind of a list that a lot of people added to, and I was really surprising because the stuff that I thought sucked was the stuff that everybody else thought sucked. And so structure of the app, the better you get at structuring an application. And it used to be people didn't even do MVC. It's not, everybody know what dry is? Dry? Anybody not know what dry is? Couple. Okay, so dry means don't repeat yourself. So when I think about code, and I don't know what it is, but I've been on a lot of projects where I had to go in and take some legacy app and that they had just given up on. They couldn't fix it anymore. They had to do something. They had to rebuild it. So I've worked on a lot of projects where we just had to totally reinvent the whole application. My number one uno thing that I see that I could say makes JavaScript suck is it's not dry. You have code chunks that are repeated all over the application, and you just can't maintain it. If you want a brittle app and you want it to fall apart, that's the number one thing. It's funny, the guy back here is taking pictures. This screen at Connect.js got tweeted a bunch of times, but the point of this here, if you've been coding JavaScript for a while, some of these things are hot contentions. This is a contention, and this is a contention. Solid principles, not everybody knows what that is. Solid. The first one is single use. So a function should only have one use. One of the things that makes your code brittle is when you put too many things in a function. And the bigger it gets, the harder it is to test, the more brittle it becomes. You try to change it, you try to maintain or enhance, and the more things you can break when you do. We talked about this a little while ago. Difficult to read code, difficult to test code, sanitizing data, garbage in, garbage out. So, I hate this one. Arrowhead pattern, anybody know what that is? Arrowhead anti-pattern. If condition, curly braces. Another one, if condition, curly braces. Another one, if condition, curly braces. So you get this big arrowhead. And then inside the arrowhead, you get a bunch more arrowheads. So there's a lot of things you can do to clean that up, but that is like one of the most brutal things I've found in an application in terms of logic. So these problems have been around for a long time. And again, going back to Croc, he's one of the first guys that really helped put JavaScript on the map as a serious language. And one of the things that he did was he wrote this, Code Conventions for the JavaScript Programming Language. This is one of the first style guides that I could find or that I know of for JavaScript. And he styled it after the one for Java. So the Java guys had their own style guide, but the JavaScript guys didn't. And sad to say, today, most of them still don't. So he wrote this style guide, and he also did this. Anyone familiar with JS Lint? Other linters. Anyone linting their code? Raise your hand if you're linting your code. If you're not linting your code, if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, wave your hand. Okay, so when you're using a language like, let's just say Java or C#.NET, one of those, these are compiled languages, and JavaScript is not a compiled language. The earlier JavaScript engines, everything was runtime. It would just, words slipping my mind, but when you commit a Java file and they do their build, all this stuff, they have a thing they call PMD, and it checks all your syntax. So they actually have rules written into the whole process that say, well, you can use this syntax, but you can't use that syntax. And if they have a rule that has curly braces, and you don't have curly braces, then you can't check the code in. It won't run, it won't build. I'm sorry, what?
Style cost.
Yes. Yes. So in JavaScript, this was the first linter that I know of. And it was very opinionated, but there was chaos back then. You know, JavaScript was chaos, and so Croc took a pretty hard line on some stuff, and he kind of pissed some people off when he did, because people didn't want to do things the way he said. But he had a lot of really good ideas. So JS Lint is kind of like the granddaddy of linting tools. That came out in 2002. And then he got really famous for his talking on code standards and JS Lint and all this kind of stuff. I think didn't he use short for Yahoo? Was it Yahoo? I think it was Yahoo. Really, really smart guy. You can catch him on YouTube. He's got a lot of YouTube videos out there. He started traveling all over the place and speaking all over the place, and then he compiled a bunch of what he was saying into this book here. Now, this book, you read this book? About a fourth. This is probably the first book that I know of. There may be some others, but probably the first book that I know of that stepped up and said, This is a good way to write JavaScript code, and that's not a good way to write JavaScript code. I'll refer to Kyle Simpson a little bit later, but Kyle made a joke about this. He called it JavaScript the easy parts, and which is kind of appropriate because Croc was saying, look, just stick with the stuff that we know that works and quit going over there with the stuff that's going to get you in trouble. There's a lot you can do here, but then follow this practice, and never, ever, ever do this. So, again, this book, I think if you're going to code JavaScript, is a must-read, but it has been around since '08. He said the place to express yourself in programming is in the quality of your ideas and the efficiency of their execution. The role of style in programming is the same in literature. It makes for better reading. Conforming to a consistent style improves readability and frees you to express yourself in ways that matter. In other words, write code that people can read, express yourself in the logic. Now, all this said, now style guides, getting to style guides. This is probably Rick Waldron, Principles of Writing Consistent. Anybody know this one? Idiomatic JS, ever heard that? Okay. All code in any code base should look like a single person typed it, no matter how many people contributed. Tall order. If you look at my code that I wrote 6 months ago, it hopefully won't look like the code I wrote today. Be a lot of similarities. So it's a tall order to say that. You're going to do some refactoring, but the point is when you're working together as a team, going back to the thing I did, the UI, last job I had before the one I have now, and I was a UI lead on a project where we had multinational teams on 4 different continents. And, 4 different cities in 3 different continents. And so we had people in Europe and we had people in India, with all different kind of dialects, and you get on the phone with them, and then we held our Scrum meetings over GoToMeeting, so there was a lot of issue trying to understand what everybody would say. But we had to reel in. I remember my boss coming to me going, what's wrong with the UI? It's like every time we fix one thing, they break 5 more things. Well, we didn't have enough unit testing for one. But we also had a lot of bad styles. And he came to me and he said, look, he says, I can't have you going down the rabbit hole all the time, just taking on the tough problems. And they're doing all the easy stuff. He said, I don't need one of you, I need 10 of you. I said, okay, what are you going to do? I said, well, I got a plan. And I laid it out for him, and he said, do it. So I started schooling guys up on different teams. I mentored these individual people. And then they, in turn, kind of led the JavaScript development on their team. And one of the things, low on time, okay. Important point. Enough said on that. Popular style guides. Google has one, Idiomatic has one, Crockford, that one, jQuery. So all your big frameworks have style guides. And sad to say, most UI teams don't. But these are big shops, these are important works, and I think there's something to be learned. I actually go out to each of these style guides, and I've sat down and looked at each one. I'll look at what does this one say about semicolons, and what does this one say about, what do they say about it? I compare what they say about each thing. So, not just because I want to do the best, I want to learn. In these style guides, you find naming conventions, variables, all this kind of stuff we talked about before, the stuff that JavaScript makes JavaScript suck. They talk about the patterns that they want you to do. From there, I'd say, as a software craftsman, you personally and on your team, create your own style guide. You should know how you code in different situations and why you code in different situations. You should know why you use curly braces and why you put semicolons in. You should know why you be wrapping parens on compound conditionals and operator precedents and all that kind of stuff like that. Now, I want to touch on this screen. This is important. It's difficult to implement a style guide on a team when you have software in place. The way that we did it and it worked was we used JS Hint, and they're constantly progressing, but we use JS Hint. It's probably the most popular one out there, but it's getting a little behind on the whole ES6 thing. What I did was I took a JS Hint file and I turned all the flags on. The relaxing, I turned them all off, and the enforcing, I turned them all on, and I put that one in the root of the project and I committed it to our repo. So everybody had it. And then their IDEs, a lot of the IDEs will pick that up automatically and run it. And the ones that don't, you have to click on it and import it. And so whenever I made a change to that file, then everybody would get it. The whole team saw it. So if they're writing, what happened was we had so much crummy code, it would basically light your IDE up like a Christmas tree. Like just red and yellow lights all over your screen. So when they're coding, I wanted them to see what their mistakes they were making. You can't implement that in a build because your software won't build. So we did a stage thing where I had the one in the root of the app with, like I said, really strict. And then the one that we used for the build, we said, okay, here's some things we're going to do. We're going to start with this. And you're not going to be able to do a build if you have this kind of mistake in your JavaScript file. So you can do it on each flag. You know, whether you're going to enforce semicolons, you're going to enforce whichever flag it is. The other thing to do is you can break it down by which component. You can actually, when you're doing your build with Node or Grunt, whatever, how you do it, you run a different JS hint file on each part of the project as you get that cleaned up. I can talk to you guys in person about this if you want. Okay, I see the, okay. 1 minute. Okay. This is probably one of the best books I ever read on JavaScript, Maintainable JavaScript by Nick Zaukas. Again, one of my mentors, okay? Love this guy, and he a lot of the stuff here, he piggybacks on a lot of the classic books and brings their topics, the points that they make into JavaScript. A must read, in my opinion. On that note, patterns, design patterns, and anti-patterns. Basically, anti-patterns are bad stuff, patterns and design patterns are good stuff. And here are 2 books. This is Gang of Four. Has anybody heard of that book before? Gang of Four, nodding heads, a few hands. Okay, so here's 2 books that talk about JavaScript patterns. This one does some of the Crockford stuff in terms of do things this way, don't do that thing, don't do things that way. But it's a best practices kind of pattern. And this one is Gang of Four meets JavaScript right here. Awesome, great book. Testable JavaScript. It's one thing to say you have unit tests, but your code has to be testable. And the harder it is to test, the fewer tests that be written, the more brittle those tests will be. High performance JavaScript. This guy wrote the YSlow thing that used to be used for several years on terms of measuring JavaScript performance. One of the first tools for that. Now it's all the browsers have their own tool, but he was one of the forerunners on this topic, and he gets into a lot of best practices and things that can slow code down or speed it up. Really, really good book. Kyle Simpson, one of my favorite authors, wrote several books. This series, have you guys read any of these yet? A few hands. First one I read was Sculpt Enclosures. He said if you're coding JavaScript, you're coding closures everywhere and you don't even know it. But he has a whole series on this and there's more coming out. He spoke at Connect.js. Guy's one of my favorite authors. With that, I'll close and just say this. These books, these guys here, these are my mentors. This is what I do. I read books, I get around thought leaders and such as that. And then working, I'm out of time, so I'm gonna shut up. It's time for a beer. Anyway.